January 3rd, 1863. Dear Diary, today I tested my cabinet members with false information about Philadelphia. By evening, I knew which one of my most trusted advisors wanted freed slaves to remain enslaved. After Samuel's revelation about the Transition Council, I'd spent a sleepless night reviewing every interaction with my cabinet, every piece of advice I'd received about emancipation, every recommendation about post-war Reconstruction. Someone close to me was working against everything I'd fought to accomplish. The problem, Mary said over breakfast, is that the traitor won't reveal themselves through normal observation. They're too careful, too experienced at deception. Then we force them to reveal themselves, I replied. And that's when I devised the test that would expose the cabinet traitor. I called an emergency cabinet meeting that morning, making sure all key members were present: Seward, State; Chase, Treasury; Stanton, War; Blair, Postmaster General; and Wells, Navy. These were the men who'd advised me on emancipation, who knew my plans, who had access to my most sensitive decisions. Gentlemen, I began, I've received intelligence about a meeting in Philadelphia on January 15th. A gathering of abolition groups who want to coordinate their efforts to help newly freed slaves transition to freedom. I watched their faces carefully as I continued with the lie Samuel and I had prepared. I plan to send a representative to this meeting with my personal endorsement. Someone who can commit federal resources to supporting these charitable organizations in their work. Chase leaned forward. That's an excellent idea, Mr. President. These private groups will be essential for managing the freedmen. Which representative did you have in mind? I haven't decided yet, but I wanted your counsel on which organizations deserve our support and which might be less reliable. Over the next hour, I watched each cabinet member's reactions as we discussed the fictional meeting. Most offered general advice, expressed support for helping freed slaves, suggested reasonable policies. But Chase was different. He was too interested in the details, too eager to know exactly which organizations would be involved, too insistent that federal support should be carefully structured with accountability measures and performance requirements. After the meeting ended, I pulled Stanton aside. Edwin, I need you to monitor Chase's communications for the next 24 hours. Every telegram, every letter, every message. You think Chase is compromised? I think he's too interested in controlling how we help freed slaves. I want to know if he's communicating with anyone about this fictional Philadelphia meeting. Stanton, ever efficient, had military intelligence officers watching Chase's movements within the hour. Meanwhile, Samuel and Elizabeth were working their own sources, tracking communications between Washington and known Transition Council members. By mid-afternoon, we had confirmation. Chase had sent 3 urgent telegrams to addresses in Philadelphia and New York, all using coded language about coordinating charitable efforts and ensuring proper management of resources. He's warning the council, Samuel said as we reviewed the intercepted messages in my private study. He thinks you're planning to support their front organizations. He's making sure they're prepared to receive federal endorsement. Chase, Salmon Chase, my Secretary of Treasury, a man who'd fought for abolition his entire career, who'd been one of the earliest supporters of the Republican Party, who'd helped me navigate the financial complexities of funding the war. He was working for the Transition Council. Why? Mary asked, voicing the question I'd been struggling with. Chase has always opposed slavery. He's been consistent in his moral opposition. Why would he work to undermine emancipation? Because he doesn't think he's undermining it, Elizabeth said quietly. I've spoken with council members who genuinely believe they're helping freed slaves. They think freed people need guidance, management, control for their own good. They see themselves as benevolent caretakers, not exploiters. But then Samuel pulled out additional evidence that revealed Chase's involvement was more calculated than paternalistic. He spread documents across my desk, financial records showing payments from northern industrialists to Chase's political campaigns, correspondence discussing labor management strategies, and most damning, a letter from Chase to a council member discussing how to structure freedmen's aid to ensure continued productivity. Chase isn't just a well-meaning paternalist, Samuel explained. He's been cultivating relationships with industrialists who want access to cheap labor. Freed slaves represent a massive workforce that can be exploited more efficiently than slavery because it has legal legitimacy and moral cover. The industrialists pay Chase, Chase influences federal policy to leave freed slaves economically vulnerable, and the industrialists profit from their labor, I said, seeing the chain of corruption. Precisely. And Chase genuinely believes he's helping everyone. Freed slaves get work, industrialists get labor, the economy grows. He doesn't see the exploitation because he's convinced himself it's mutual benefit. But it wasn't mutual benefit when one side had no alternatives, no bargaining power, no ability to refuse the terms offered. That wasn't employment. It was coercion dressed as opportunity. We need to confront him, Stanton said. Arrest him for corruption. Remove him from the cabinet. No, I said, thinking strategically. If we arrest Chase now, the Transition Council will know we're onto them. They'll change their plans, hide their operations, and we'll lose the opportunity to expose them at the Philadelphia meeting. Then what do you propose? Mary asked. We use Chase the way he's been using us. Feed him false information. Make him think we're following his advice while we're actually preparing to dismantle the council's entire operation. Elizabeth nodded approvingly. And I can work with freed slaves in Washington to create alternative support networks. Real help without the controlling contracts. When the council implements their system, freed slaves will have other options. We also need to investigate everyone Chase has been advising, Samuel added. If he's been influencing your emancipation policies, we need to identify which recommendations were genuine and which were designed to serve council interests. Over the next several hours, we systematically reviewed every piece of advice Chase had given me about emancipation and Reconstruction. The pattern was disturbing. On moral and legal questions, Chase had been consistently supportive of abolition. But on practical implementation, on questions about land distribution, education funding, legal protections for freed slaves, his advice had always steered toward leaving freed people dependent on private, charitable organizations. Organizations controlled by the Transition Council. But then Samuel revealed the evidence about Willie that I'd been dreading to hear. He pulled out a separate folder, this one marked with Willie's name. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Mr. President, what I'm about to show you is the hardest thing I've ever had to present to anyone. If you'd rather not know. Show me, I interrupted. Whatever the truth was, I needed to face it. Samuel laid out medical records, household staff schedules, and correspondence between council members. The picture they painted was devastating. In February 1862, Willie had gotten sick with what doctors called typhoid fever. But Samuel's investigation had uncovered something else. 3 Transition Council members had visited the White House in the weeks before Willie's illness, all under the guise of discussing emancipation policy. The council was frustrated with your timeline, Samuel explained gently. You were planning to wait until after major military victories to issue the proclamation. They wanted you to delay even longer, until they had their post-emancipation systems fully in place. They discussed in their correspondence how to create personal pressures that would make you more receptive to their timeline. They deliberately infected my son? My voice was hollow. I can't prove it definitively. The illness could have been natural. But the timing, the access, the correspondence discussing using family circumstances to influence you, it all points to deliberate action. Mary's hand found mine. She'd already seen this evidence, I realized. She'd known for 3 months that Willie's death might not have been natural, and she'd carried that knowledge alone while helping Samuel investigate. Who? I asked. Which council members had access to Willie? Samuel showed me 3 names. One was a prominent abolitionist I'd considered a friend. Another was a northern industrialist who donated heavily to the Republican Party. The third was someone I'd trusted with sensitive information about military strategy. And all 3 had been recommended to me by Salmon Chase. The pain and rage I felt was indescribable. Not just that my son might have been murdered, but that it had been done by people who claimed to support abolition, who presented themselves as allies in the fight for justice. They'd killed Willie, my beautiful, intelligent, loving son, as a tactic to manipulate emancipation timing. Abraham, Mary said quietly, we don't know for certain. We can't know for certain. But we know enough. We know they had means, motive, and opportunity. We know they discussed using family pressure. We know Willie got sick right after they visited. What are you going to do? Stanton asked carefully. I'm going to Philadelphia. I'm going to document everything the Transition Council is planning. And then I'm going to destroy them so completely that they never threaten another family, never exploit another freed slave, never hide their cruelty behind the mask of charity again. The rage I felt was cold, calculating. Not the hot anger that makes men act rashly, but the ice-cold fury that makes them act effectively. But first, I continued, we need to prepare. Samuel, I need you to teach me everything about how freed slaves are organized in the North. I need to understand their communities, their challenges, their strengths. If I'm going to fight the council, I need to understand the people they're trying to control. Over the next week, Samuel and Elizabeth took me on a journey I'd never expected. Not physically. We couldn't risk the president being seen in certain neighborhoods. But through their testimony, through documents, through interviews with freed slaves willing to share their experiences, I learned about the complex networks freed slaves had built: churches, mutual aid societies, informal schools, economic cooperatives. I learned about the challenges they faced: discrimination, violence, exploitation by employers who knew they had few alternatives. I learned about their incredible resilience, their determination to build lives of dignity and meaning despite every obstacle placed in their path. But what shocked me most was meeting a young woman who revealed how deep the Transition Council's infiltration really went. Her name was Sarah, barely 18, who'd escaped slavery in Virginia 3 years earlier. Elizabeth had brought her to a secret meeting in a safe house Mary maintained. "Mr. President," Sarah said nervously, "I work as a housemaid for one of the council members. I hear things they say when they think servants are invisible. What have you heard? They're not just planning to control freed slaves through work contracts. They're planning to control everything: where we live, who we marry, what we learn, where we can travel. They have a whole system designed to keep us dependent." She pulled out papers she'd stolen from her employer's study. "These are maps. They show planned freedmen's communities in southern states. Segregated areas where freed slaves would be concentrated, making it easier to control and monitor us." The maps showed dozens of these planned communities, each designed to keep freed slaves isolated from broader society, dependent on council-controlled organizations for employment, housing, education, and even food. It was a reservation system, similar to what had been done to Native Americans, but designed for freed slaves. "They talk about it like it's kindness," Sarah continued, her voice bitter. "Like they're protecting us from a world we're not ready for. But really, they're making sure we can never be truly independent." I studied the maps, feeling sick. The Transition Council had been planning this for years, building infrastructure, positioning assets, preparing to implement their system the moment emancipation took effect. "Sarah, would you be willing to testify about this? To speak publicly about what you've heard and seen?" She looked terrified but determined. "If it means my people get real freedom instead of this, yes, I'll testify." "You'll be protected," Elizabeth assured her. "We have safe houses, security measures, people who will make sure the council can't retaliate." "They've already killed Willie," Sarah said quietly. "They'll kill anyone who threatens their plans. But I'm willing to risk it because I didn't escape slavery just to be put in a cage with different bars." Her courage shamed me. I'd been thinking about emancipation as a political and moral issue, something I needed to accomplish to preserve the Union and end evil. But for people like Sarah, it was life and death, the difference between humanity and property, between dignity and degradation. She had more at stake than I did, yet she was willing to risk everything to fight for real freedom. "We have 9 days until the Philadelphia meeting," I said, looking around at the group assembled in Mary's safe house. 9 days to gather more evidence, to build our case, to prepare for exposure. And we need to do it without letting Chase or the council know we're onto them. But then Stanton brought news that changed our timeline dramatically. He burst into the safe house, breathing hard from running. "Mr. President, we have a problem. Chase has moved up his travel to Philadelphia. He's leaving tomorrow instead of waiting until the 14th. And he's taking cabinet documents with him, including your notes on Reconstruction policy." "He's suspicious," Samuel said immediately. "Something tipped him off that we know about the council." "Or he's just being cautious," Mary suggested. "Moving up his timeline to ensure he's positioned before you can interfere with council plans." Either way, it meant we had to move faster than planned. "I need to leave for Philadelphia now," I said. "Tonight. If Chase is going early, I need to be there to observe him, to document his interactions with the council." "You can't travel alone," Stanton protested. "You need security, backup, support if things go wrong." "I'll go with him," Samuel said. I know the underground railroad routes, the safe houses, the people who can provide shelter without asking questions. And I'll coordinate from here, Elizabeth added. I have contacts in Philadelphia who can provide information about council movements, about where meetings are being held. Mary looked at me with the expression I'd come to know. She disagreed with my plan, but understood why I had to do it, and she'd support me despite her fears. Be careful, she said simply. You've already lost Willie to these people. Don't give them the satisfaction of taking you too. Within hours, Samuel and I were on a train to Philadelphia, traveling under assumed names with falsified papers. I was dressed as a merchant, Samuel as my assistant. Our cover story was simple. We were surveying northern cities for potential business investments. The train ride gave Samuel and me time to discuss strategy in the privacy of our compartment. When we reach Philadelphia, the first thing we need to do is locate Chase and determine where he's staying, Samuel explained. The council likely has a safe house they use for meetings. If Chase goes there, we'll know where to position ourselves for surveillance. And if the council discovers we're watching, then we improvise. But Mr. President, you need to understand, the council has resources we can't match. Money, political connections, infrastructure built over years. If they decide to eliminate us, we're vulnerable. So we've been before. Every time we've fought these conspiracies, we've been outmatched. But we've won because we've been willing to take risks they don't expect. Samuel smiled slightly. You're either the bravest president in American history or the most foolish. I haven't decided which. Perhaps both. As night fell and the train carried us toward Philadelphia, I thought about Willie, about the life he'd never live, about the future he'd been denied by people who saw children as pawns in political games. But then Samuel revealed something that gave our mission even more urgency. Mr. President, there's something else you need to know about the Philadelphia meeting. The council isn't just planning to discuss their post-emancipation system. They're planning to vote on a proposal that would formalize their control. What kind of proposal? They want to create a federal bureau, a freedmen's bureau, supposedly to help former slaves transition to freedom. But the council members will control who gets appointed to run it, how its resources are distributed, what kind of help it provides. It would give them federal authority to implement their exploitation system. The bitter irony struck me. A government bureau designed to help freed slaves would become the mechanism for controlling them. The council would use federal resources, federal legitimacy, to implement a system that kept freed people dependent and exploitable. Congress would never approve such a bureau if they knew its real purpose, I said. Congress won't know. The proposal will be presented as humanitarian aid, as responsible government assistance for people who need guidance during a difficult transition. Most congressmen will support it because it sounds moral and practical. But if the council controls the bureau's implementation, then they control freed slaves' access to jobs, housing, education, legal assistance, everything. And they do it with government authority and public funding. I understood now why exposing the council was so critical. They weren't just a private conspiracy. They were trying to capture government power to implement their system at a national scale. We have to stop this proposal, I said. Even if we can't completely destroy the council, we have to prevent them from gaining federal authority. That's why the Philadelphia meeting is crucial. If we can document their real plans, prove they're not the benevolent helpers they claim to be, we can prevent Congress from giving them that power. January 5, 1863, Philadelphia. Dear Diary, I write these words from a small room in a boarding house near Philadelphia's docks. Samuel is asleep in the chair by the window, keeping watch. Outside, the city is dark and quiet. We've been in Philadelphia for 2 days, tracking Chase's movements, identifying council members, mapping their networks. What we've found is both encouraging and terrifying. Encouraging because the council isn't as unified as they want us to believe. There are factions, disagreements, competing visions of how to control freed slaves. Some members genuinely believe they're helping. Others are cynically exploiting. The divisions could be used against them. Terrifying because the scope of their operation is larger than Samuel's initial evidence suggested. They're not just in the North or just in the South. They have networks throughout the country, connections to state governments, relationships with military officers, influence over newspapers and churches. I wonder sometimes if I'm fighting too many battles at once. The war continues, soldiers dying every day. Emancipation creates new challenges, 4 million people need help transitioning to freedom. And now this, a conspiracy to undermine everything emancipation is supposed to accomplish. Am I spreading myself too thin? Should I delegate these fights to others? But then I think about Willie, about Sarah's courage, about the millions of people depending on me to ensure their freedom is real. And I know I can't delegate this fight. It's too important, too personal, too fundamental to everything I believe about America's purpose. Tomorrow, Chase meets with the council leadership. Tomorrow, I position myself to observe and document. Tomorrow, I gather the evidence needed to expose this conspiracy and protect real freedom. The candle burns low. Dawn approaches. The most important meeting of this entire struggle is hours away. Whatever happens tomorrow will determine whether emancipation means freedom or just a change in the chain's composition. I choose freedom. Real freedom. Freedom that means land, education, opportunity, dignity, not just legal paperwork while economic bondage continues. The fight continues. But at the Philadelphia meeting, I would discover that the Transition Council's plans were even more sinister than I imagined, and that Jefferson Davis's presence wasn't about cooperation, but about something far more dangerous.